I think the first revolution was virtualization. The second is actually using the cloud, and the third is code. And that's, when something is being affected by code, you see security teams becoming closer to developers. And the concept of DevSecOps, I think, is a great proof of how code affected the way that we do security, that we do operations.
Welcome to the DevSec for Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. Welcome back, everyone, to the DevSec for Scale podcast. I'm Jeremy Hess, and with me today is a very special guest. We have Ohad Maislish, who is the co-founder and CEO of Env0. Ohad, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm having a great day.
Great, it's a pleasure. So let's go straight into it, even before we talk about you and your journey to where you are to Env0. So more and more, we're obviously seeing the move to infrastructure as code since probably, say, 15 or so years already, plus maybe. Can you tell us a bit about where this idea of IAC started and how far we've come till today?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's when we talk about DevOps, the concepts of both developers and operations doing things together. And if you look at infrastructure and applications, a lot of things have changed. Applications became more complicated and infrastructure became more complicated or with more options. And with that, different technologies emerge. When we look at the operational folks trying to automate their tasks, they start writing code. When that started, they started with the natural basic scripts like bash scripts, and then it became more sophisticated, maybe with Python or more levels in those scripts. But then some concepts emerged with configuration management, Chef, Puppet, and later Ansible. Yeah. And that really helped automating configuration, but not yet the infrastructure, because you didn't do much with infrastructure 7 or 10 years ago. You had one server, one virtual machine running a Java monolith or something like that. So you just need to configure the Java application. But now that you have cloud native, so many different resources, Kubernetes containers, Lambda functions, platform as a service, so many things that you consume from the cloud in different types of resources, you need to manage your infrastructure in scale as well. And that's why you have CloudFormation, Terraform, and infrastructure as code. And the interesting thing to see is how they work together, those frameworks, with configuration management and other scripts in order to manage your infrastructure and application end to end.
Got it. Yeah. So definitely come a long way to microservices. I've had a few podcast guests as well talking about security of microservices, and it can really be a pain when you get down into the weeds of every service. So let's go back, take a step back. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Ohad, what you've been doing until now, and what led you to Env0?
Yeah, thanks. So I think first of all, I'm a geek. I like tech. I started programming at a young age. I worked in tech in a young age, and I was always doing developer work. Later became a manager, but then at some point I switched and became a founder. Specifically about Env0, I had a company. It was actually a services company. And we did some very interesting projects with some amazing customers. And I remember one time I was sitting with a customer of one of my customers. It was a very big American insurance company. And I remember that I found an issue in their ELB, their load balancer in AWS. And they needed to change the configuration of that ELB in order to fix the issue. I was expecting somebody to click a button in AWS in order to modify that load balancer. And then I saw that this person opens GitLab, changes Terraform code, and merge the pull request or or the code, and then it's being executed. And then when we took a look again at the AWS account or the GUI, I just then noticed that it's read-only. And it was for me an aha moment for, hey, AWS has such a advanced role-based access system, and eventually the humans have no access, and only the code has actually full access to provision and update cloud resources. And now we have those DevOps engineers that need to manage two totally separate systems, the code and the cloud accounts, and they don't have the tool to bridge that gap. So that led me thinking that Infra-as-Code is totally changing the way we operate and manage our cloud accounts. Started talking with a lot of potential customers, and the normal story of founders raising seed money or pre-seed, having the first design partners, having the first users, customers, more fundraising, and so on and so on. And here we are today.
And that's it, just as simple as that. And I want to make a mention as well. We talked about this before the show for very briefly, that you have a podcast as well. Do you want to quickly shout out that podcast?
Yeah, thanks for letting me give a shout out to my podcast. So it's the IACpodcast.com, the Infra-as-Code podcast. So everything about DevOps, and especially around infrastructure, Infra-as Code, how it affects the architecture and the processes within the organizations. Yeah, we have some amazing guests in the podcast. It's on Spotify and other platforms. So please follow and see for yourselves.
Yeah, we'll put a link down in the description of the episode. Thanks. For sure. So yeah, of course.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that's great. So getting back to IAC, your specialty here, obviously countless developers are using still and or were using Terraform. That's the big name in the room, the elephant. And not too long ago, HashiCorp, made quite a bit of a stir in the news with regards to their licensing. Can you tell us a bit about what happened, why it happened, and why it's really important to developers like yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So indeed, HashiCorp on August decided to change most of their open source licenses to something called BSL, Business Source License. It's definitely a different approach, and they have several very popular frameworks. I think the top two are Vault, which is related to the thing that Achilles is doing, and Terraform. So they've changed the license of most of those frameworks. Now, specifically about Terraform, Terraform has a vast ecosystem of open source modules, providers, and other tools that work together with Terraform and provide a lot of value for Terraform. I can mention Atlantis, Infra-Cost, Chekhov. I can zoom in and elaborate on that value, but all in all, you have an ecosystem of solutions that help you to manage your infrastructure as code or your infrastructure at scale with confidence, secured, not expensive, and so on and so on. So when they made that change, immediately it creates more concerns about the future and the limitations of what can and cannot be done. There are other open source infrastructure as code frameworks, such as Pulumi, for example. So immediately we've heard about some folks that thinking about migrating from Terraform to Pulumi, pausing their projects to migrate from CloudFormation to Terraform. A lot of instability was added to the Terraform ecosystem, and not sure what's going to be in the future. With this amazing opportunity, not a small, but a nice group of vendors and community influencers decided to embrace this opportunity and to ensure the future of the Terraform ecosystem as open source. I am proud to be one of the folks behind that, and we created what was initially named OpenTF, later renamed to OpenTofu, and contributed that to the Linux Foundation and CNCF. So it's now officially a project within the Linux Foundation and CNCF. As a project there, it has all of the needed governance to ensure that it's being impartial and involved in the community as it should. And this project already gained a lot of momentum, about 20,000, close to 20,000 GitHub stars on the project, a lot of contributions, a lot of innovation, and also the maturity of this project that just recently announced the general availability of the OpenTofu, which also includes not just the binary itself, but also a new Terraform registry, which is like an index to all of the providers and modules that you need. So it's a drop-in replace. You just can easily use open source, and this will add a lot of stability around the ecosystem of the Terraform concept, the Terraform language, in order to make sure it's open source. So if you use OpenTofu, you know that you're using open source, and it will remain open source because it's under the Linux Foundation. So it's guaranteed it's going to be open source forever, unlike a vendor-backed open source project.
Absolutely. And Env0 was also one of the backers, is one of the backers of the project as well, right?
Indeed. So we are very happy to be one of the main supporters of OpenTofu. And if we look at the official way such a project is being managed, in those foundations, you have a technical steering committee, and everything is published and well documented. And those decisions are being done in that committee, and we are very proud to be involved in that technical steering committee as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a really great thing that was done, and obviously you can tell just based on the engagement that developers really appreciate it, and it's going to have hopefully a really long life throughout the future as it develops as well. So going a little bit now, shifting a little bit towards the security side, I actually had Eran Bibi, CTO of a great company called Firefly. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And we discussed policy as code and how that enables developers to stay secure and focus on getting their work done, but also keeping security in mind. What are some of the technical security vulnerabilities that you've seen develop in the IAC realm in general, and maybe even something in OpenTofu specifically? And how are you guys addressing those kinds of concerns?
Wow, yeah, definitely. And hi to Eran. He's a great friend, and I like him and Firefly very much. So before we talk about security, I think it's important to understand the responsibilities of today's engineers. I sometimes give the example of Spider-Man. If you remember the movie, I think it was Spider-Man's dad who told him, with great power comes great responsibility. So
Uncle Ben, I think that was.
Okay, so you know better than me about the movie. But regarding that quote, it means that now those infrastructure engineers can easily change code. It's in their GitHub, and somebody in a few seconds or in a few minutes or maybe a day will execute that code. And that code, again, is representing your infrastructure. And if you do that, it's just code. It's not like actually putting a cable in the router or changing the configuration that you really feel that you're doing something to the infrastructure. It feels more real. It looks like yet another code that can have a bug or something, a small bug in the application. No, this is the infrastructure. So you can easily create a security vulnerability. SSH, you can create instances with SSH open or a weak password, and you think it's just going to be deployed maybe in your dev environment or in one specific branch, and you're not sure when or where it's going to be executed because it's code, and in your mind it was just for this environment, but you don't have the context of where this code is going to be executed. So Yeah, things like SSH and just the rules of the inbound traffic that you accept to your machines, to your VPC, to your network. All of those things can easily being done in a wrong way. And when we talk about policy as code, that's the de facto standard on how you enforce several policies that forbid you from doing the wrong things. You also have static code analysis tools that look both on the code and what's called the plan, what's going to be executed. Chekhov, DevSec, Terrascan, those kind of things really help you to block and shift left those errors and making sure that you're not provisioning the wrong things security-wise.
Absolutely. So that being said, how do these types of things impact the future journey of where IAC, sorry, is headed? And like, what is the impact that it's going to have on, let's say, not just DevOps, but the DevSecOps idea as well going forward?
Yeah. So I think code is the third cloud revolution. I think the first revolution was virtualization. The second is actually using the cloud, and the third is code. And that's, when something is being affected by code, you see security teams becoming closer to developers. And the concept of DevSecOps, I think, is a great proof of how code affected the way that we do security, that we do operations, and so on. So I think any organization now needs to understand that the concepts that were relevant 10 years ago need to change. And you need to understand how you're going to manage your infrastructure and code together, whether it's processes, whether it's the type of folks that you hire. Up until 5 years ago, you probably hired just folks that understand AWS to manage your AWS account. But now if they don't know CloudFormation and Terraform, they're probably in the wrong, it will be more challenging for them to be fruitful and helpful for that organization. And same for security. If you just have folks that understand in firewalls, that's nice. But now when everything is in code and you see your infrastructure being changed by Terraform or Pulumi or other scripts that are running and affecting your security, you need to understand which are the right tools that work hand in hand with those technologies. So I think we are seeing another major revolution, how cloud is becoming code, and that affects DevSecOps. It gives the DevSecOps a lot more responsibility, and it's a different culture. It's a different approach to shift left security, starting from the code, whether it's the infrastructure or the application code.
Absolutely. And the next question I was going to ask, and of course, throughout this whole episode, you've been mentioning a bunch of these tools because you just mentioned tools. I was going to ask what your sort of go-to open source tools are for security in this, sort of IAC, DevOps, DevSecOps type of world. What are some of the ones that off the top of your head just kind of are maybe even what you use on a regular basis?
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned policy as code, but I still didn't mention OPA, Open Policy Agent.
OPA.
It's a graduated CNCF project, and this is the de facto way, the de facto standard today to implement security at scale with code. So if you're thinking about, if you work in DevSecOps and you still didn't hear about OPA, and you still didn't write some policies in OPA, I think you should. And this is the most effective, in my opinion, the most effective and important way to scale your security, help your teams to move faster and stay secure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on that same note that you just mentioned about moving fast but staying secure, what are some other tips that maybe you might have for developers that can sort of facilitate that. And I'm not talking about necessarily tools, maybe even sort of thought process, frameworks, ways of, dealing with the culture, for example. What are ways that they can make sure they're still able to get the work that they need done? Because of course we need it done. That's like our first priority. But the other first priority is we need it to be secure.
Yeah, I think we can look at that from two different ways, from the user and from the admin point of view. The user, let's say you're a developer and you have tons of things to do. And if you notice that some of those tasks are regularly being like taking too long for those to be accomplished because you wait for somebody else, there is a bottleneck. You need somebody to change the security settings. You need somebody to provision a new Kubernetes cluster or namespace for you. If those things don't take immediately, or definitely if they take way too long, over and over again, up to the point that you abuse your existing infrastructure in order to just develop the things you need to do, your responsibility in the organization is to raise that concern to your managers, for them to be aware where the bottlenecks are. On the other end, if you are an admin, if you are those managers, and you see that you have a very busy person, this person probably needs help, whether it's more folks on the team or different tools or different processes. I remember one time I met an engineering leader. He manages like 300 engineers. And I've asked for like 30 minutes of his time. And he has like a very nice office. And I sat with him and we kept talking and talking. And the conversation lasted 2 hours in his fancy office. I remember at one point in the meeting, I've asked him something and he said, honestly, I don't know that answer. Alex from my team knows that answer. And I said, can we call Alex for 2 minutes for him to answer my question? And he said, oh, no. Alex is super busy. We cannot ask Alex anything. He's too busy. So if that's the case, Alex being too busy means that a lot of developers wait for Alex as well. And the entire organization is not as efficient as it can be. So if you are the executive, if you are the admin of what's going on in the organization and you see those bottlenecks and there are some folks that you are worried about approaching them because they're too busy, that's a problem you need to fix. So I think that's my culture kind of answer of how to identify those issues and remove those bottlenecks.
I like that. That was a great tip. One of them that we haven't had yet, because usually our tips are more tech related, specific to a tool or something, some way of securing, whether it's SSO or other ways, keeping your, there's obviously great tips, but the cultural aspect at the end of the day, I mean, when you're dealing with large organizations,
why Alex is maybe busy. Maybe he's not using Okta and SSO, and then he has a lot of issues that he needs to fix. If he had something like Okta, he'd probably be more efficient to set those rules in Okta, and then he can do other things. So no longer a bottleneck when it comes to user and permissions. So yeah, it all adds up to the human bottleneck.
Very quickly. Absolutely. Perfect. Ohad, thank you so much for your time. This was a fantastic episode. I had a great time, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy this as well. So have a great day. Thanks so much for your time. And for all the listeners out there, stay safe. See you next time.
Stay safe. Thanks, Jeremy.